we're talking about advice for steampunk specifically, I honestly don't even know from my conception as someone who's written over 1 million words and has spent way too much time talking about writing on YouTube. In my conception, there really isn't steampunk specific advice that I could give you, or really anyone else could give you, aside from people who have like made a huge name for themselves in steampunk, because there's probably like some nuances that they could, you know, send your way. But for the most part, the setting of your narrative isn't really that important at all. It's the story within the narrative and how you can parlay the setting to accentuate your story, right? So if we're going to talk about cyberpunk as far as like an aesthetic and as a setting for a story, and if we think of edge runners, a huge thing in edge runners was, and this is for most stories, funny enough, you guys are going to learn a cheat code here, almost every story is about identity and who you are, right? Because it's the transformation of a character from one state across the narrative transversal, which is kind of like your B, into like their final state, which would be C's, right? So it's like A, you start at A, and then you go to B, and then you go to C. And so that has to do with the identity of the character. But with cyberpunk, it was this idea of becoming somebody different, living up to your potential, augmenting yourself, kind of like, you know, what is it, like the ship of Theseus idea of how much can you change yourself? What is the right amount to change yourself? And cyberpunk can do that allegory really well, because like literally you augment your body to become better. You conform to societal standards through expectations. It's about like this idea of, you know, modern day would be like, you know, possibly body augmentation through surgeries or going to the gym to make yourself better. But with cyberpunk, again, you can go even further and you go like, I'm literally just going to change my body. And stories in a cyberpunk setting can deal with the, like, you know, the I think the concepts about, you know, human community and connectivity because of the internet and because of having like Wi-Fi in your brain, or again, body augmentation. How much can you change yourself to not be human? I say all that to say, setting is mainly supposed to be a tool for you to use your narrative to the fullest extent, right? So if you have a steampunk setting, you might want to think about like, okay, what would people in a steampunk world have to deal with, or my steampunk world? And then you think about like, what types of stories would best be represented with my setting and the characters that are dealing with my setting. So every steampunk world is going to be different because, you know, every author is different, unless you're specifically taking from someone that you really like. But I would say that you really should be looking at like, you know, what makes my steampunk world steampunk? How does that affect my characters within my steampunk world, or any setting that any of you have? And then how do I best and most exaggeratedly tell that story through the allegory of what my setting could help me achieve? If you think about characters and settings and plots in that manner, your setting almost becomes a wash, right? Well, a wash in the sense if it doesn't really determine what type of stories you can tell, or there's no one way to write a fantasy, there's no one way to write a horror. You can learn from the giants, but you know, if I'm writing a horror, I know that I'm going to be evoking emotions that are related to fear or supernatural or the occult or religiosity. And those things can have a story come about. And if I'm writing stuff with steampunk, it could be stuff about industrialization, the mechanization of humanity, the assistance of humanity, the man versus nature, you know. There's so many different avenues. And so again, my cop-out answer kind of is, you can't like be given specific advice on how to write steampunk, but I can tell you that steampunk should inform you of what types of stories that you should be putting your characters through in the settings that they involve in, based upon like what your steampunk setting is. So I hope that could help.